Welcome to CareerSpeak, a podcast dedicated to telling the stories of student success. On this edition, we'll be talking with Gabriel Ortiz, a graduate student in textile design, about his experience and recent internship in Japan. I'm your host, Patrick Ryan, and this is recorded on the East Falls campus of Thomas Jefferson University. You are listening to CareerSpeak. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of CareerSpeak. Today, Gabriel Ortiz. Gabriel, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I feel fantastic. Thank you again for coming in and joining us. So who is Gabriel? What do we need to know?
Yeah, totally. So I grew up in just right up the street from school, right there in Chestnut Hill. And I was fortunate enough to have a really extraordinary background with respect to my family, being geographically located in a variety of places, specifically New York. I graduated high school, super nerdy, didn't know how to dress, but a little bit too extravagantly, I would say. And then that carried over into Colorado, where I ultimately would graduate from there with a dual degree, one in anthropology and then a minor in fashion design and merchandising. So I really then capitalized and found what it was that I wanted to do, which was describe culture through dress, and basically how do people communicate who they are in a comfortable way through their dress. So that was a really important part for me, academically, personally, kind of for the whole story. Really, I was fortunate enough right out of undergrad to work for an amazing company called Gibberish, where they focused on men's outerwear for the ski community and the ski culture, really. And I had a great opportunity not only getting to manage two of their stores during my tenure there, but help provide some logistical help as well as design help as well when it was needed. That would ultimately then propel me into Boston. I was managing their shop there on Newberry Street, and if you're familiar with that area and in that market, Newberry Street is like the hub, what's poppin', and it's where all of the busy stuff is happening for not only the fashion industry but for culture as well. So culture and fashion have always been really hand in hand, because that's how you are able to navigate and really get from place to place or group to group as well. When my tenure finished with Gibberish, I would then move on to go work at Converse as a custom footwear designer. And that was a really great opportunity. Thank you, Converse, again for that, because I really had a lot of fun doing that. I got to work directly on making custom footwear for customers that came into the flagship store on demand. So you, for instance, you'd come to me, you'd be like, hey, I really want an awesome pair of rad sneakers. And I'd be like, okay, cool, let's draw this out, let's mock this up, tell me what kind of images you want, material, and it'd basically I'd have an hour deadline to manufacture a sneaker for you.
Wow, that sounds really fast.
Yeah, so by the time I finished at Converse, I had pumped out over 1,000 sneakers, I think. I was making on average between 8 and 9 sneakers a day. So yeah, it was really a high pace, high learning curve kind of environment, but that's what I really do well at. I like a challenge, and I like being able to perform at my best, but also being able to provide a product to people that they're going to love, they're going to engage with, and they're going to love for the rest of their life, really.
So here's the obvious question here. You saw a lot of success immediately out of undergrad. So a lot of people are probably wondering, and I'm wondering, what made a master's program the next step for you? Why was this the next decision?
Ultimately, at the same time while I was working at Converse, I had my own studio practice where I was a part of, I believe it was at the time, 16 other designers and artists sharing a space. And it was really there that my skill set became I approached my skill set from a much more macro standpoint, where in this space, I'm seeing entrepreneurs not only running their business, but they're also infusing design and art into their life. There were other artists that were working in multi-mediums. They were not only just painters, but they were also designers. They were also making apparel. There were potters. So there was just an extensive range of other artists, designers, and creatives in that space. And it was clearly apparent once I had started there that there were skills, there were assets that were still missing from my repertoire that I understood that I could accomplish.
So one of the topics that we're going to talk about a little bit later on is you went on a trip as a part of your study abroad for your master's program.
Yeah, I did.
And so you have probably listened to the podcast. You have already sort of heard some of the previous guests, and basically what I ask, what are the 3 words that you think have sort of led to your success? And we already heard one of them, and maybe even 2 of them in your intro as to what you're trying to do professionally, right? Which is combine culture and fashion. So what are the 3 words?
My 3 words are culture, value, and we wrote down a bunch of other words in conjunction with it, but I'm going to stick with process as my 3rd word.
So for everyone listening, we do this mock-up board here where we go through and we have these different words, and we never really came to a 3rd. There's like 7. So thank you for just choosing one. In the pre-production meeting, we never really circled one, did we? Okay, so moving on. Not a problem.
No problems at all. We're going to sail through this.
So a lot of success so far, but this trip abroad was really interesting to me when we talked about it in pre-production and even before I met you before we decided to do this, because you went about it in a very interesting way. So talk about why you decided to study abroad to begin with, but then how you came across this particular opportunity, because it's very interesting.
So, I mean, yeah, that's probably the word that most people would use in association with me is interesting, in both contexts or both lights rather. But for me, Japan was a really important opportunity to fulfill and manifest. Really, I had I had my own interest in Japanese life, whether it was culture, fashion, and kind of their overall aesthetic and approach towards life. And what really then solidified that connection for me was weaving. What ended up happening was originally I had found a program in Kyoto. And for those of you that don't know, Kyoto is the cultural heritage capital of Japan. Most people, when they go to Japan, it's to Tokyo, it's to Kyoto, to Hiroshima, to these very big Okinawa. There are these very big metropolitan hubs. And of those metropolitan hubs, Kyoto, while it is a big city, is referred to as their cultural capital. There in Kyoto lies probably the greatest amount of artisans and people who are still practicing craft at a very high level. So it was really important for me to get that direct engagement for my craft specifically, which was weaving. And I had found a school out in Kyoto that specialized in what it was that I was looking for, which was specifically dyeing techniques and weaving. It's like a perfect marriage kind of opportunity. In that, I reached out to the university. I had our university study abroad reach out to them as well. And for those of you listening, we have an amazing study abroad program. They will work with you to get you where you want to be. And for me, it was Japan. Although our university does not have a specific Japanese trip yet, and this is the best part, yet, there are other opportunities really close to us in the area that you can connect with to make those things happen. And what ended up happening was I applied to the program through Temple. I got all the necessary documents and paperwork so that the transfer of the credits would work out. It sounds like a lot of work. It can be a lot of work, but that's the most important part, is that it's super rewarding to have those things kind of get checked off in the process of it all. So I think it was by the end of last semester, everything kind of happened super quickly. I knew that the first opportunity wasn't going to pan out by January, and then by I think February or March of this past year, the Temple application, I had submitted the Temple application. I found out the next week, picked classes, and by that time, it was already April, and I left May 6th. So everything on that end, that process to kind of make Japan happen, happened super quickly. And it is quite a process on top of school as well, which are your main priorities. So
to recap, we have an amazing study abroad program here. And in addition to that, living in Philadelphia, which has a ton of schools, Temple included, obviously, in North Philadelphia, there was other opportunities to not only take advantage of the programs we have on this campus, but also a chance to blend them, right? So to be able to use another resource, another university that's close by, geographically very close, and be able to make this particular trip happen. So as you said, it didn't work out exactly the way you wanted because you didn't end up necessarily doing weave per se.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the opportunity that you did get, because in addition to going abroad, you got an extra piece as well. Talk about that.
Yeah, so the extra piece was I got to go to Japan first, and then I was taking 9 credits total. Of those 9 credits that I got through Japan, 3 of those credits were an internship that I had solidified with Japan's, I would say, oldest but also most regarded and prestigious menswear brand. They're out of Tokyo as of right now, but they go by the name of Kamakura Shirts. They have a direct history to the garment industry and the textile industry post World War II, so they've been around for quite a bit of time, and I was very fortunate to get that opportunity because not only I could have not been accepted and not had the opportunity, but there really wasn't something else that would have fit so perfectly for my life and what I was doing and studying at the same time as well. So when I had applied to the position, it was originally for a communications and media kind of role. And as my time there developed, things kind of switched and changed in a great way, really. So my time in Japan for the full 5.5 or 5 months that I was there, 3 of those months I was working for a full Japanese apparel company that operated in Japan and had 2 stores in the United States as well.
So let's back up. Before you're leaving, you decided Japan. You gave us all the reasons why specifically for you.
Yeah.
It was definitely the trip you wanted to take. But when you think fashion, right, you're thinking
Yep.
New York City, you're thinking Paris, you're thinking of these other sort of quote-unquote fashion hubs.
Yep.
So for you, looking at it from just a textile fashion place, other than going to Japan because you should go to Japan.
You should go to Japan for sure.
What should draw a textile designer, a fashion major here?
Well, if you're into dyeing processes and just weaving or knitting in general, they have an incredibly intensive process with regard to craft. For those of you who are designers and artists, I think most of us would agree that the Japanese aesthetic and approach to process with regard to design is almost heavenly to a degree. You know, it's regarded as one of the best, or is the best rather to some individuals. But for me specifically, and anybody else who's interested in textile design specifically, they have an extensive indigo farming and cultivation process where a good amount of the southern part of Japan, because it is an island, is dedicated towards growing indigo. And Japan has really capitalized and really made a name for themselves with regard to techniques of how to dye with indigo as well. So there's quite amount of history, not only to learn about Japan's relationship with indigo, but then on the artistic and design side, all the techniques that you can use and employ with indigo, whether it be block printing, whether it be dyeing, whether it be washi paper, calligraphy. There's a variety of techniques and methods, designs and approaches and mediums that you can become completely immersed in, and then look up and 60 years later you've gotten old, kind of a thing.
So now you're here, you're taking classes. How are you getting around? Was that easy to figure out? No problem at all, right?
Oh, yeah. I wish I could say that and bat an eye, but it was difficult. Like, the things that you hear about Japan are most likely going to be true to an extent. The subways, the trains, the idea of being packed in, it's a total reality. So if you're claustrophobic, figure something out before you go, because you are going to wake up in the morning. You're going to take the train at the rush hour because you're a student. You're waking up a little late, most likely. And the public transportation system there is extremely, extremely reliable. It's how everyone navigates, because a car is a luxury in Japan. So a lot of public transportation, it's very accessible. The Japanese, specifically the Tokyo subway system, will take you all the way out into the other prefectures, so that then you can connect to the other smaller towns as well. So a lot of people, depending on where you're at in terms of life, for me, I was in Kawasaki at that point. So between Toshimaen and Kawasaki was like a 45-minute bike ride. And that transition from living by myself to living in the dorms with an international community was rad, because not only am I in a space with other students, but they're also commuting, they're also experiencing the same things as me. So there was that camaraderie as well that was going down.
And troubleshooting, I'm sure, right?
Oh, so much troubleshooting. And that was the best part, was that there was other students there that this wasn't their first rodeo in Japan. So I was lucky because I had 3 weeks in Japan before the program started. So I kind of had a little lay of the land.
What did you learn from your own work values, your own kind of approach to work, and, how did this experience in Japan, did it change it? Did you see a different, work values, or how did that word kind of come to be?
So it really came to be because of work. I was in a human resources and management class over the summer as well, and that was one of the bigger topics that we talked about. When you go into any job, or when you're selecting a job, the workplace's values should somewhat align with who you are as a person. If you're into sustainability and the company that you're working for is just wasting pigment, that's probably not the best place for you to be. But for me specifically, because I have this background in anthropology and now I'm almost done with my master's in textile design, I need to be able to understand what my values are and what that looks like when I'm almost going to marry a company, kind of a thing. It's a dance. I'm asking my company to dance with me.
He's courting a company. That's
yes,
what he's
courting. So when obviously you have all these huge influencing factors day to day that are happening, but because I had a very interesting experience with work specifically, I got to not only reflect on my values professionally, interpersonally, but also appreciate, understand, and learn what the Japanese value. And for me, understanding the distinction also between the two and where the two overlapped was extremely valuable for me.
So tell me about what that looks like to the American student, right? What would they maybe witness or be able to pick up on pretty quickly?
So you'll once you get in Japan, there's a variety of experiences that you can really engage with. Of that, you'll find that a good percent of the population falls under this term of salarymen, which are individuals who are, yes, they're making a salary, but they're working in a corporate setting or a corporate office, and 9 times out of 10 they're going to be wearing a business suit between business hours, and most times after business hours as well. And that was more or less the community that I was engaging with because of the level at which the company existed. So a lot of my coworkers, except for the 2 that were foreign, were all Japanese and all kind of fell into this demographic, really. And then you have artisans, you've got artists, you've got kind of the whole slew of mix there. But the most important thing that is very distinguishing and that you'll see very first is work is life there. There is this understanding that we all work together to make Japan better kind of idea. And that was something from an American standpoint where we want to be able to find a job that doesn't feel like a job and that we can do and have as much fun as possible. While that is the American approach and the American value towards being a working professional, that is something in Japan it is on the opposite end of the polar extreme. You're expected to have a job, and that is the honorable thing to do so that you can support Japan and raise Japan and make Japan what it is right now. Here in the United States, we value expression. We value individual creativity. It is a different part of life and a different approach to life. It's not to say that it's better or worse.
So let's get into the job. So this was, for all of you that have been following along, this is where we came up with 7 words and never really decided on one. So we decided on process. Thank you for that.
Process.
So what are you doing in this job on the day-to-day? You mentioned earlier it sort of changed midway. Were you happy with the work that you ended up doing? Was it valuable? Was it exciting? Tell everyone about the type of work you were doing in Japan.
So when I interviewed first for the job, my employer reassured me that I was overqualified for the position. I humbly took his suggestion. I was like, okay, we're still going to have fun at the end of the day. That's what this experience is supposed to be, is not only something fun, but something informative and something that pushes me professionally in the direction that I want to go. So when I arrived, I was supposed to be a media and communications intern.
The most nebulous title ever.
It was very, very just kind of interesting to kind of even decipher that, because it could have meant a multitude of things. But when I got there, it really was a lot of photography, a lot of social media, and yes, some textile woven design aspect as well, kind of integrated into that, because that's what my major was. Probably somewhere around week 3, I was just completing every assignment the day of work. So they'd hand me an assignment first thing in the morning, and later in the afternoon, most likely within 4 hours, I was like done with it, and I'd show up the next day and they'd be like, "Oh, you finished that already? We don't have really much else for you right now." So there was a bit of an adjustment period for me working wise in terms of my speed, or how fast I was completing things in terms of the rest of the office. And as time progressed, they realized that my skill sets and my approach to not only fashion was much different, so they had me somewhat pivot into a creative business design consultant position, because so the majority of their stores are in Japan, kind of scattered throughout, and then they have 2 stores in the U.S., specifically in New York, one on Madison Ave, and then they have one in Rockaway at the mall. And because of the aesthetic of the company, it is a Japanese company looking at Ivy League culture as their aesthetic and their form of execution. So if any of you are familiar with Brooks Brothers, they are the same but different as Brooks Brothers. They are looking to encapsulate this same aesthetic, which is this Ivy League culture that has this blue collar working aesthetic to it. Influenced by jazz, a variety of things, but in Japan.
Now, would you say blue collar or white collar?
I think it goes both ways, because a lot of people who were going into the Ivy League, yes, can come from money, but then it was also a lot of people who were coming from blue collar and infusing that into it as well. So as my time kind of had developed there, the photography was still very much a part of my day-to-day, but becoming more of a consultant for them so that they could understand the psychology of the American consumer was much more important for them.
So moving forward from where you were then, it sounds like when you changed into this consultant role, you did less of the media and communication, and you were doing more sort of brand management from the U.S. eye, from the U.S. view. How would you say that?
Yeah, I think the position really evolved into a creative directing position as to how to engage Americans with a Japanese product through an American aesthetic. And that was something that they had their own formula to, and they were doing well with that formula, and they're still doing well with that formula. My job was, okay, how do we make this sustainable towards the future? How do we continue the longevity of this brand so that the narrative continues and it's not just a rinse, repeat, and recycle kind of approach to it?
So looking ahead to graduation, moving on to your next role, your next job, your next entrepreneurial endeavor, is there a lot that you could take from this position and this experience that you think will changed or has changed the way you look at fashion, the way you look at marketing, the way you look at communicating brand and aesthetic?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think for any designer or any artist, authenticity is the most important thing. Being authentic is what's going to drive people to you. We all have our favorite artist, our favorite singer, and that in and of itself comes with its culture. For instance, I love hip hop. I'm deeply ingrained in what that aesthetic and what that community of culture is like. I've listened to everything from the oldies all the way up to what's happening contemporarily. And for me, that experience working with a brand like that, which had such an amazing amount of heritage, reinforces my choices really lifestyle-wise with respect to my job. But it was really a great opportunity to take the skills that I have been developing over the past 10 years, because I've been doing this for almost a decade now, where it was affirmed that I am on a path and I am good at what I do. And it's really kind of rewarding to have had that experience, to go from undergrad to be working in the industry, to go back to textiles in a graduate setting and learning things in a different way. I tell people about my story a lot, and I tell them that I somewhat started at the end of where fashion starts, which is the consumer retail level, and I've had to kind of backtrack my way through that to chase the fiber all the way back to its single origin, really. So that whole process was very rewarding.
There it is, folks. There's the word.
There it is. I dropped it.
The process.
Everyone is going to have their own process, really, and at the end of the day, kind of scratching away at those hints, scratching away at those feelings or those urges are what are going to drive you forward, not only professionally but personally as well. If I wouldn't have had this opportunity over the summer, I really don't know what I would have done with my summer. I probably would have just been at home weaving. But this really does, again, kind of propel me in a variety of ways, because I worked for an international company that is successful and is thriving not only in one continent, but is doing so well in New York, which is another metropolitan hub of fashion as well, chopping it up with some of the other greats as well. So yeah, it was a process from start to finish. Everyone learned a lot, not only myself, but my employer learned a lot as well. And that's a kind of, I guess, experience that you really want, is this holistic approach to where the job is giving and I'm giving, and we're both learning in the process, so that at the end of this, there's a great outcome that manifests.
Looking ahead, we're talking about process now, but looking ahead, what's next? So we talked about you're working on kind of the final things before you graduate in May, and now you're looking ahead. You have this great experience. And by the way, if again, following along, a ton of great experience, years of great experience before this. So what's next?
Does it have to be concrete? Can I change it in like a week or so?
That's what process is all about.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah.
So that's fine, as long as nobody's going to hold me to it.
Yeah.
As of right now, I'd love to, specifically the big dream, I think for everyone has like this end goal, go back to Puerto Rico and set up a vertical manufacturing facility. There's zero manufacturing right now in Puerto Rico, especially after Hurricane Maria. The economy has an opportunity to use textiles as a leveraging point. There is a massive amount of real estate that has been left over by pharmaceuticals, and that those facilities are already industrially zoned. So at that point, it's just a matter of bringing in equipment, finding the right hands, and starting to weave yardage. So long-term goal, weave in Puerto Rico, set up manufacturing, weave wool there. Short term, pay the loans, pay the banks. But no, find a great job that I love doing, that I can engage with, and obviously support a community at the end of the day.
Finally, What advice would you give to other textile students that will be in these programs after you, given the experience you had in Japan, but before that too? What do you think is the most helpful advice either you've heard or that you think would help them better their craft, get better at what they're doing, to innovate, just to keep this kind of tradition going?
For those of you who are interested in going into textile design or the creative fields, understand that it is hard work. It does not come overnight, or it is not something that you can pick up, drop off, leave it sitting there for a few months, look back at it and be like, oh, I think I want to pick this up again. It's really a way of life. It incorporates into so many things. And for those that want to become textile designers, know that you are fulfilling a need, not only in this country, but in our generation, to produce fabric. We all need clothes. We all need to keep ourselves warm over the winter. And those kinds of skills are what we need right now more than anything. So understand that your choice is valued. Understand that you're going to become a part of a bigger culture more than anything, and that it is a process in order to not only understand your process, but understand who you are as a person and what kind of dreams and accomplishments you want. And ultimately, if you are extremely passionate about what you do, that will transpire in your work and that will transcend in what you do. So make the most of every day, make your own kind of luck, and hit home runs.
That is the voice of Gabriel Ortiz. I am your host, Patrick Ryan, and this was another edition of CareerSpeak.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Our theme music is composed by Spencer and Robin of Single Use Plastic, edited by Robin and Patrick. Our podcast is in collaboration with WPHU and Career Services.